So, our agenda, we're going to be covering a couple different areas today. First area that we're going to highlight is I got in and I'm not sure if I should go to grad school. Second area, I'm thinking about applying, but I want to know a little bit more about either the process or just some things to think about. What does grad school mean? What are you going to be doing while you're in grad school? And then the final area that we're going to be addressing is I want to keep learning, but I don't want to go back to school. So these are just some very broad topics that we're going to be talking about, and we'll be diving a little bit more into each of these areas as we go through the presentation.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, and like Carolyn mentioned, right? We have folks who are maybe already applied to grad school but are on the fence of whether they should go or not. Folks who are thinking about applying in the upcoming season. And then folks who want to continue with professional learning. So we'll definitely today talk about those different areas.
So before we begin, just a quick quote to get us all connected here. Be yourself, everyone else is taken. And this is a quote by Oscar Wilde. I really like this quote because it just says so many things about the grad school process, the general life process that you're going through, but what's going to work for you is not going to work for the person next to you and vice versa. So if you see somebody, they're doing all of these great things and you think, oh, that's really cool, but I want to do my own path. That's exactly what you should be doing. So be yourself, do what makes the most sense to you, chart your own path. And we're here to just kind of help you with some quick guidelines and things to think about as you're going through specifically the grad school process. So if I can have the next slide, please. So before we begin, that kind of leads me into there's a lot of stuff to think about when you're thinking about grad school, going back to school, education, taking classes, studying. And some of these might be kind of, heavy. You're like, oh, I don't know if I want to go back to this, or do I really want to bring out my favorite lucky pencil for taking tests again? But just know that there's a lot of stuff to think about, right? And that there's an entire team here supporting you. So we're just giving you some tidbits, some ideas. Some of it might be applicable to you, some of it might not be, but just kind of take all of this information, think about it, process it. We're so excited that you're here spending time with us on a Friday, that you committed to spend some time for your future. And instead of spending time on Netflix, you decided to log on here hang out with us for an hour. So thank you so much for committing some time for yourselves and planning for your future. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Ricardo, who is going to start us off on our first subject.
Perfect. Okay. So the first overarching kind of category or for folks who might be in the situation in their career kind of phase, right, is I got into grad school and I'm not sure if I should go, right? Kind of going back to is now the best time to go to grad school, right? So we're going to be talking about different things, be presenting a lot of different information. So kind of just to get it started, these are some quick things to kind of for yourself to start thinking about, right? So to begin first, really starting and thinking about identifying your goals, right? So a question to ask yourself, well, what are your plans once you're going to graduate, right? What is the occupation, kind of going on to the second point, what is the occupation that you want to pursue? What is the industry that you want to pursue, right? And does it require graduate or professional school? And if it doesn't necessarily require it, would it help, right? So in the next couple of slides, we're going to be talking about some of that information and how to go about finding that. In addition to, as you are identifying your own goals, right, kind of what to do next. Sometimes I've met with students who are still kind of even thinking about, well, what they really want to do, what they're interested in, what are some of their values. So in addition, in part of the process, and you identify really your goals. For some folks out there, for some students, you might still kind of even be exploring like what you really enjoy and what you really like. So you might still be early on in your career development, in the career development phase. So I would encourage you all, some strategies are to, maybe start identifying your goals and ways to do that. There's various ways, but I would encourage you, a great way to get started is by coming to the Career Center, talking to a career educator, and really start thinking about, well, what do I enjoy doing? What are my values, right? So today we're going to be talking about it from a more analytical, I guess, practical approach, depending on like, do I need it? Is it going to help me? Or more from a values approach too, is like, do I value higher or going to graduate school? Is that something that's just important regardless of how much I'll make or not? Um, and then lastly, were you thinking about going to graduate school eventually, right? For some folks, it may make sense that if you are already thinking about going to graduate school anyways in your long term, um, while there may be an economic downturn right now, maybe it is a good opportunity. So that's something for you to think about. But to let you know, you're not alone in the journey and that we're here to support you to start having those conversations, talking to a career educator, to one of us at the Career Center. Perfect. Alrighty. So is graduate professional school needed? Well, it depends who you speak to, right, or what you want to get into. So some occupations would or do necessarily require um, getting education past your bachelor's degree, but here are some factors to consider. So, for example, kind of what I mentioned previously is what is the occupation you want to pursue, right? Uh, what do you need it for that? So, part of that identification process will help you kind of go through that. And there's different websites, different resources that you can use to find. I know Carolyn later on will be talking about some of the resources. For example, one of them is Vault. You can find some of that information about job requirements, different things like that. Sometimes it might be a little hard to find that information, but some other strategies is identifying organizations, right? What is a company or an occupation you would like to pursue, right? So by identifying like target organizations, places that you know one day you'll be happy or that you want to work in, can help you in that process. And then maybe the next step is start looking at job postings, right? So I think job postings are a great reference point to really look at, well, what are the jobs that I want to eventually get into looking for? What are the skills? What are the qualifications? Usually they'll always list like a certain type of degree from a certain type of area. So that's also a great way. In addition to that as well, for folks who might be thinking, well, it doesn't necessarily need it. I don't need it, but will it help me in my career journey, right? So some ways to approach it is to start conducting informational interviews, right? So setting up informational interviews with people who occupy the jobs that future you might want in the future, might have, and asking them about, how they got to where they're at, and asking questions like, if I, go to graduate or professional school, is this something that benefits in this industry, in this occupation? So these are some different things to consider, and strategies to kind of approach identifying for folks who are maybe on the fence of going to graduate school and whether they need it or not. And these are some graphs, some data, just to kind of represent your options with a bachelor's degree. Obviously, you all listening today, if you're a graduating senior, you're going to have a bachelor's degree, right? And for folks who are thinking about maybe going to graduate school or professional school, there are options as well, right? So this is based on the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS. And it really just shows job openings with a bachelor's degree and a graduate degree. So on the left-hand side, there are projections from 2016 to 2026, and we're right in the middle of that, right? So as you see on the left-hand side of the screen, on the left graph, registered nurses, software developers, general and operation managers, those are some of the top most job openings that there is with a bachelor's degree, right? And on the right-hand side, most new jobs that are projected to grow are physical therapist, lawyer, uh, post-secondary health specialty teachers, nurse practitioners. So those are some of the top ones for graduate school. So they kind of ties in back to what is your goal, right? Identifying your goal, what occupation or what industries you want to go into. I do want to preface this with saying that, you know, uh, COVID-19 definitely affected several industries. So this is something that was created that was projected for growth. I would definitely say do additional research and kind of look into specifically how it's affecting industries or occupations that you want to go into now. If you are thinking about, well, should I go to graduate school? Do I need to, especially now? So this is just some data that showed before COVID-19. So definitely doing additional research. In addition to for folks who might be thinking about next steps, if you are thinking about going to graduate school on the fence, we kind of want to present different information as well. So as you see on the graph, this is the weekly earnings by education, right? So question is, does having a graduate degree make a difference, right? Well, it depends. For every individual is going to be different, right? We're going back to for someone, if that's one of your values, then how much you're going to make might not really make a difference or not. It might not matter. But overall, this graph just represents how graduate and professional school degrees recipients earned more. And this is based on data from 2018 and also from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. In addition, had lower unemployment rates. But I would definitely say it also depends on the industry and the occupation that you want to go into. So really taking that into consideration, because this is just more of overall general trends and data, but it really varies on occupations, on industries. Um, and if this is part of the equation of you deciding whether to go to graduate school, of like, well, is this going to help me in my career? Am I going to make more? This is just some data, but I would encourage you to do additional research on the specific industry, because you might personally know folks. I know I personally know folks um, who maybe didn't even go to college or didn't earn a graduate degree and are successful in their own ways. So for example, this kind of next slide are, some other journeys to success, folks who, either went to college or dropped out or didn't even go to college. So for folks listening in, these faces might look familiar. Ellen DeGeneres, Steve Jobs, and Mark Zuckerberg. So, there's definitely different journeys to success, but it's really up to your individual journey and you exploring, kind of going back to what are your goals, what are your values, what are your interests, um, and is graduate school that next step for you? So we kind of just wanted to generate and start that conversation for you to think about, but also let you know that we're here to support you, and the Career Center is here to kind of help you in that journey as well if you are in the fence. So next, kind of going to, do I need to go to grad school in today's market? So if you are considering now, right, thinking about, well, maybe the economy is not doing well, if that's maybe what you're thinking about, and should I just go into grad school? I guess it just depends. It goes back to, well, identifying your goals. What are you thinking about going into, right? So this graphic just kind of shows how different industries have been affected by COVID-19, right? So some of the most impacted ones, for example, are restaurant and bars, travel and transportation, entertainment, which includes casinos, amusement parks, and other kind of retail stores such as department stores, car dealers. In addition to that, manufacturing, so any aircraft and car manufacturing. So in total, these sectors account for 20% of all US paid enrollment. So definitely doing your research and thinking about, well, is my industry the industry that I want to go into, or the occupation that I want to go to is affected? Um, and if it is, like, what are some next steps? What are some other strategies um, that I can do? So in the following kind of slides and presentation, we'll be talking about other things that you can do as well. And this is just more information that kind of goes in percentages by industries, how it's impacted different industries, and um, kind of going reiterating arts and entertainment and recreation. One of the top ones declined by 56.4%. So definitely a huge impact. In addition to that, is kind of thinking about the question that I posed earlier, is right, is how is the industry that you want to pursue affected by today's economic standing? And also thinking about what are some other options that you have. So talking about options, these are some more graphics to kind of just represent, and this is of course before COVID-19. So again, doing additional research, but these were some projected occupations, and it encompasses different types of degree holders from high school to bachelor's to a master's. So as you see in like the top, I would say maybe that's like the top 8 or top 9. A couple of them were master's degrees, some of them were high school degrees. So there are different occupations and industries included on this graphic, but it's kind of going back to showing you like identifying what your goals are, um, and what your values are in addition to that. And that's just a continuation of the previous graphic. So it lists more occupations, and this is all based on the labor statistics. Cool. So we're going to switch up gears a little bit. We're going to be talking about the transition from undergrad to grad school. So definitely adjusting to graduate school. Um, there are some major differences, right? I myself at the beginning shared that I too am a graduate student or in graduate school. Um, so definitely I have a lot of the personal experience and stories to talk about. But some of the things to think about, for example, right, is time commitment. As some of you I might already know or probably have heard from others, grad school is intense and requires a lot of studying, research, and writing, right? So although depending on the grad program, if you might be taking less classes, those classes might weigh heavier. So there actually might be a lot of things that you have to do outside of the classes. So for example, quick anecdote for me, I remember my first year of graduate school, um, that transition, I kind of went straight from undergrad to graduate school. I just continued on that summer. So that also played a part, but I remember that like the first couple of weeks I was exhausted. I would get home and just fall asleep after class because my classes were in the evening. Um, so I had to be different places and doing different things. So definitely took up a lot of time, time investment kind of being in different places. In addition to that, another consideration to think about is employment, right? As you are transitioning, or if you're thinking about going into grad school, right? You may be working now, you might have a part-time job now, or maybe even a full-time job, right? So if you are going to grad school and thinking about, well, how am I going to finance that, right? Which we're going to talk about later. Um, some folks, you might have to do a part-time or a full-time job. So thinking about, balancing school with employment. In addition to that, I know personally for me, I had to do internships as part of my graduate program. So working and also going to school and taking classes and doing other things definitely was something that I had to manage, right? In addition to that, I personally knew people in my graduate programs that were working full time and were also full time parents. So that kind of goes to say everyone has their own journey, their own experiences, and it's really for you to think about like how have you balanced college up till now, and how has that worked for you? In addition to that, is kind of personal life, right? Um, Going to grad school, professional school can have an impact um, on your relationships as you work with, as you're kind of going into school, right? For example, now that you have classes and you have more kind of time to invest into those classes, you might have less time for other people who are important for you in your life, right? So that's something also to think about. I know personally for me, those are conversations that you might have to have with your friends, your significant others, as you're kind of going into graduate school, because that also can play a big part in that. And then lastly, finances and budgeting, right? That's a big part of it. Is also thinking about what is your kind of financial readiness before you apply or are thinking about going into graduate school, right? I know Carolyn will also be talking about finances later on specifically, but that's also something to think about. Um, Maybe creating like a budget of how that would look like if you are going to be going to graduate school and maybe can't work as much. How is that going to work out? And then some other just factors to consider in addition, as well as you are maybe are on the fence of and thinking about, well, do I need to, should I go, and if you already applied. So some things to think about is, right, kind of thinking about the purpose or the reason for you even starting or applying to graduate school, right? So something to think about is, really reflecting and thinking about, why am I applying? Is it because, is it based on my values? Is it based on whatever it may be, right? Or is it based on because, the job market is not looking well, so maybe I should just go into grad school, right? So some things to think about is you could potentially do other things if that is maybe the reason to avoid like the job market. You can potentially do other things while the job market gets better, such as applying to other secondary choices that maybe weren't your plan A or even your plan B, but finding other opportunities to still develop your skills and experience. Because as you all may know already, graduate professional school can be a big time and cost investment. So going into it with making an informed decision is definitely important. So talking about decision making, right, and making that decision. So these are some kind of strategies or ways to kind of approach your decision, right? If you are on the fence, these are some things to consider. Um, I would definitely say that, of course, coming into the career center, talking to someone, having individualized support, it can also add a lot more value. But these are some other things that you might already have done or are thinking about doing, right? So one step is, collecting all relevant information, right? Do the research and compile information on the relevant factors that play a role in your decision to go to graduate school, right? So this includes financial cost, time commitment, how is this going to affect your current situation now, right? So collecting all this relevant information and kind of um, collecting all those kind of puzzle pieces that make up that decision. In addition to, know all your options and explore all potential options, right? So not necessarily limiting yourself by just like, hey, I only have one option. It's either A or B. Maybe there's an option C. Maybe you can do other things as well. So definitely identifying and brainstorming what are your options, whether it's going to graduate school, not going to graduate school, or what are some other ways of um, growing professionally or developing those skills or entering the job market. What are some other options? um, and then also creating a pros and cons list, right? This is something for someone who likes that, right? There's some people out there who like doing lists and kind of approach it from that manner. So if you resonate with that, maybe writing out a list of the pros and the cons with the decision up on the top, and listen, what are the pros and the cons of this decision, right? And that way you can visually kind of have it all on paper, without kind of it just running all over your head, because it can be overwhelming, right? And then as you're making a decision, right, of course, being in a relaxed mood, and really being in a stress-free kind of environment, in a good headspace to be able to make that well-informed decision. Um, so this is more for someone who, likes more of the kind of practical way of a rational, I guess, way of making decisions. There's some folks out there who might be more intuitive, who just it comes more through a feeling, right? Like, how does it feel? So there's different ways of making decisions, of course, but I would encourage you, if you need additional support, come into the Career Center. Alrighty, so this is actually a student's testimony. It's a graduate student from UCLA. So one of our colleagues helped us out in connecting with this student. So they kind of ties into this section of our webinar. So I'm just going to read it for any folks who are listening in, right? So, going back to school was a hard choice. I didn't really want to go back to having homework, but I knew I had to. I couldn't advance in my career without a master's degree, and from working full time for 2 years after undergrad, I found out that there is so much I have not learned yet within my field that I could learn about if I go back to school. I also knew that going back to school would help me land a better job where I can support my family even more. And bam, just like that, I knew I had to go back. I had to go back so I can reach the job levels I wanted to, but also wanted to learn more about how to support students in different ways that I haven't yet to hear about. Fast forward today, and now I'm 4 weeks away from finishing my master's at UCLA. So this is from a student from the School of Education. So it is also a fellow Bruin and a fellow graduate student Bruin from here. So this really kind of goes back to reiterating, right, from the student's testimony. It seemed like there was different factors and decisions into why they made that decision, right? Some of them are a little bit more obvious, are in the testimony. So for example, here says they needed it to kind of get to higher levels within where they wanted to go into the different industry. And then it also might have just been part of their values. So it really kind of just goes back to say, well, doing that additional research, where do you want to go, what occupations, what industry, and do you need it, or is it just a value of yours? Alrighty, so now I'm going to pass it over to my colleague to cover our next section.
Hi, everyone. So before we kind of get started on this next section, just wanted to remind you, go ahead, post some questions into the Q&A or into the chat box. We'll have some time at the end of our presentation to address all of your questions and make sure all of that's covered. So if you think of something while we're talking, go ahead, type it in, send it on over, and we'll make sure we'll be able to help you, if not answer your questions, hopefully find some information as to where you might be able to get the best information. All right, so I'm going to be talking about students that are thinking about applying, but they might need to know a little bit more about what the grad school application process is like. So one of those really important factors is school application. So what really goes into that application process? Another area is just different factors to be thinking about, and we'll talk a little bit about what some of those areas might be, and then the decision process. So how to go about picking a program. So if I can have the next slide, please. So what are the elements for a grad school application? And really, it's going to depend on each school that you're interested in, but these are just some general commonalities that you might want to start thinking about. So if I can have the next slide, please.
Carolyn, just a heads up, I know we have a couple Q&A.
Mhm.
I can't see it on my end. I'm not
Okay,
able to see
perfect.
it. So just a heads
Thank
up.
you. All right, so application process. So like I said earlier, these are just some commonalities. Some application process might be totally different than this, but these are just some general ones to keep in mind. So the first one is letters of recommendation. Start thinking about who you want to write your letters of recommendation. When do you want to ask them? Where do you need to have everything sent to? So keep in mind that a lot of the schools might have different deadlines. So if you're asking somebody to write a letter of recommendation for you, probably best to make sure that they have a good amount of lead time to write you that letter of recommendation, just so they have plenty of time to write the very best letter that they possibly can about you. Another thing to think about is that personal statement. So every school might have a different prompt. Prompts are going to vary from school to school. And that's not something that can really be copy and pasted from one school to the other. It's like targeting your resume and your cover letter to each job that you're applying to. Make sure that your personal statement is directed towards the specific school and the specific program that you're applying to. Next, standardized exams. So I know this might look a little bit different, especially right now with the pandemic happening, but this is a really good question to think about. Do you need to take standardized exams? What is that going to look like for the application process? Are you taking it at home? Do you need to schedule it for next year? Is it going to be an optional part of the application process? So if you're not able to find some of these questions, best to ask the admissions representative for the school that you're applying to, so they can best help make sure that you're satisfying all of those application processes. And then step 4, interviews. So interviews might be a part of the application process. For me personally, when I was applying to grad school, every school that I applied to required some type of interview. One was a phone interview, and that was just one-on-one. I was talking with the admissions rep. Another one, I had a group interview. So I was scheduled in with 4 other candidates who were considering the program. We had a prompt to read ahead of time. We had a couple questions that we needed to answer, and that was the interview process. They really just wanted to see how we could collaborate with other classmates and how we would have group discussions. And then there were also some other individualized interview questions after that. So each school process is going to be a little bit different, but if anything, it's really great practice for just making sure that you're prepared, comfortable, and ready to talk about yourself. And then step 5, there's always additional application materials. So just make sure that you're reading the entire website, making sure that you're answering a lot of those questions, a lot of those prompts that they're having, and making sure that you're satisfying all of those materials. Now, I know that looking at this list might be overwhelming for some, and you might think, oh, that's a lot. I'm not ready to do this. Taking another standardized exam. I don't want to write a personal statement. I don't know where to start. Totally fine. That might just mean that going through the application process now might not be your time. But if you're feeling like, oh, I know all this information, I'm ready, I got this, I know who I'm going to ask for my letters of recommendation, it sounds like you're ready to go and you definitely have the momentum, you're moving forward. But if you're kind of in the midway point and you're thinking, oh, I have some of these satisfied, but some of it, I'm not really sure where I'm going to go. Lean on your network, start asking questions. The Career Center, we are here to help. So those personal statements, we can kind of help get the ball rolling for that. Letters of recommendation, leaning onto your professors and such. So UCLA Bruins, you have a team, a giant team here to help you. So make sure that you reach out and start asking some of those questions. I can have the next slide, please. How the Career Center can help. So I was talking about this a little bit earlier, but career advising, one great way that you can start connecting with some of the career educators to make sure that you're asking the right questions, you're on the right path, or if you have no idea where to begin, we're here to kind of help tailor some of that information for you and make sure that you have knowledge of some of those resources to start finding some answers to the questions that you have. You can also come join some drop-in sessions. So those are Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays from 10 to 2. And they're virtual right now. So you just log on to Zoom and one of the career educators or career peers will be able to help. We're mostly focusing on resumes and cover letters, but if you have some very specific questions and want some more time, schedule one of those 30-minute appointments. And then same as you sign up for this workshop, you can also attend some other events and workshops. Their topics vary, so definitely make sure that you check some of that information out. And then digital resources. If you want to do some independent research and you think, oh, I have some ideas, I want to do a little bit more research before I know what questions to ask, Handshake, you can definitely utilize that. There's the career guide, there's Vault, Going Global if you're interested in some international opportunities, and then Interview Stream. A great way to practice your interviews, especially since we're doing a lot remotely right now. So you can sit down and practice the interviews and then watch the recording back and see how you would come across to a potential recruiter. So I'm going to pause really quickly and see if I covered anything that was in the Q&A. Let's see, a lot of this I think we'll address a little bit later in the presentation. Okay, if I can have the next slide, please. All right, so what else should I be thinking about regarding continuing my education? So there's a couple different pieces, right? Finances is huge for grad school. So figuring out how are you going to be funding that degree? Where is the money going to be coming from? Loans from government or private loans. So those are those are two options that you might have. So filling out your FAFSA before you step foot on campus. Same process that you went through to make sure you filled out the FAFSA for UCLA. Going to fill out the same application form online. So submitting that earlier rather than later to make sure that you filled out all of those requirements. And in case there's anything missing, you'll still have time to do that. And the government might have certain limits on how much money you can take out. Some loans have fixed rates, some rates might change, some are even based on your credit score. So this is a really great time to make sure that you have all of that information and you're doing some research and figuring out what's going to be the best for you. For private loans, while they do, or some anyway, have pretty low rates, they might be less flexible in terms of loan forgiveness or being able to defer your loans. And some you're even going to be required to pay them off while you're going to school. So that could be a challenge when taking out some of those private loans. So make sure you're reading all of the fine print before you sign your name away and take out thousands of dollars in loans and figure out what's going to be the best option for you. Scholarships and grants is another great option because that's free money, right? And that's kind of going to be based on certain criteria. So that could be merit-based, that could be just general financial aid, that could be a discipline that you're interested in. So make sure that you're applying to that and satisfying a lot of those requirements. And then if you want to work for your school or maybe your employer might be able to help with some tuition. So that could be taking on positions like being a TA or a GA, a graduate assistant, so that way you can work while you're going to school. Or there's even fellowships where you could have a stipend while you're attending classes or working on some research. So again, this will vary from school to school, but do a little bit of research and figure out what other students in the program that you're interested in are doing. Sometimes there are even opportunities to reach out to current students and just get a feel for what their program's like and how they're kind of coping with classes and paying for everything and such. So if I can have the next slide, please. Considerations for selecting a program. So I just did a really quick Google search and I typed in, how do I select the best grad program for me? And this is one of the charts that popped up. And I kind of like this because it was just a very easy template, outlined everything, and allowed me to just kind of put in a score and rank the different schools. Now, these are not the only factors that students would be considering when looking at applying to a grad school. So these are just some ideas. Total points possible, you can change that. It doesn't have to add up to 100 points as you're going through it. And there are other things to consider. So it could be one really important thing might be the faculty. Some programs might have a really small student to faculty ratio, and some might have a really large student to faculty ratio. So since right now we're kind of working remotely, think about how easy is it going to be to get a hold of some of your professors and ask some of those questions. So this is just something to kind of think about, and also think about, how is this going to change? What is the fall quarter, the fall semester going to look like? How is that going to change for the spring? Do you want to manage those changes, or how are those changes going to be managed? So these are questions that we might not have answers to right now, but they're really good questions to start asking and think about, what is that change going to look like? How is that going to affect me? So if I can have the next slide, please. What options are available for grad school and professional school? So this is really going to depend on each individual student and how it's like how you're going to utilize those degrees. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Career Center. There's so many ways that the Career Center can help out, especially utilizing Handshake. So for students, current students, you have access to Handshake and the Career Center. Upon graduation, you will be able to utilize the Career Center resources for 3 months after graduation, and then you will be able to have access to Handshake after 1 year. And after those time frames conclude, there is a fee associated with that, but just keep in mind that while you have access to it, while it's free, definitely utilize that while you can. And I'll just quickly recap. This is what I had mentioned earlier. You can schedule one-on-one career advising consultations. You can do drop-ins. There's a lot of workshops. So if you're thinking about, oh, I want to learn a little bit more about grad school, there might be some other workshops in the future where we'll be bringing admissions representatives from specific schools, so you'll be able to talk to those representatives. And then again, articles and digital resources. If you want to do some independent research, this is a great way to do that too. So if I can have the next slide, please. All right, I want to keep learning, but I don't want to go back to school. So some things that students might do is take a gap year if they want just a little bit of time off. Maybe they'll be doing some professional development, or maybe they just want to start navigating the job search and figure out what their next job is going to be. So if I can have the next slide, please. Should I take a gap year? Well, first we need to figure out what a gap year is. So according to the Gap Year Association, and yes, there is such a thing, the gap year is a semester or a year of experiential learning in order to deepen one's practical, professional, and personal awareness. So there's a lot of different things that someone might be able to do during their gap year or gap semester. And that could just be time to build your resume, get experience, start talking to people. This could be time to earn some money, take some time to just save up as much as you can, so that way when you're ready to go to grad school, you have all of that money ready, so you don't have to take out any loans or as many loans as you need. And then you could take some classes based on interest. So you could take classes at the local community college, you could go to the community center, you could even take classes on LinkedIn Learning or Coursera. And this could just be based on some interest that you had. It could be a skill that you know a little bit about, but you want to know more. Or it could be a skill that you're thinking, this would work really well for this dream position that I have. I want to make sure that I have this skill and I can include it on my resume. And through this entire process, it's really important to stay positive, keep moving forward. Everything that you're doing is going to help you, as long as you're making decisions to kind of boost yourself and you're preparing for your future. So these are just some examples of what you might be able to accomplish during your gap year. If I can have the next slide, please. So this is an example from the Gap Year Association, the National Alumni Survey. This was completed in 2015, and this is a survey that was based off of 1,000 students. It was a voluntary survey. They completed this information. The age range of participants for this was between 18 to 65. So I know you might see a couple categories on here about increased interest in attending college, or satisfying language requirements to college. So those would be definitely more applicable towards students who are exiting high school and entering college. But a lot of these outcomes are definitely relevant to all students of any age. So I want to bring your attention to the top 6, and those are, it's showing as pink on my screen, but those are all personal outcomes: allowing time for personal reflection, allowing time to develop as a person, increased maturity, increased self-confidence. So these are just some examples of things that people felt that they accomplished after they experienced their gap year. And then the next couple of categories, those are career related. So they might have taken time to do some networking, talking to others. So there's a lot of different things that you're going to be able to accomplish during your gap year. So it's really important, like Ricardo had mentioned at the very beginning, setting those goals, either writing it out, figuring out what your pros and cons are, what you want to accomplish, and you'll have all of the time to be able to do that. And you might even accomplish some things that you didn't think you would be accomplishing during your gap year. So if I can have the next slide, please. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about my gap year experience. I took a gap year that turned into 3 years. As soon as I graduated and I got my bachelor's in economics, I was just focused on earning money. I wanted to be self-sufficient. I wanted to get a job. And so I took the very first job that I was offered. So I was working and I wasn't really paying attention to what I wanted. I didn't think about what my next step was going to be. I just took it and said, oh, I'll figure it out. I'm sure there's other opportunities within this company. Something will happen. So there was a time after I was working for a little bit, I had 2 months where I was not able to work. And I saw this as kind of a forced reflection for me, because as I was at home and I was thinking, well, what do I like? What don't I like? What am I enjoying about this? Where do I want to go? What direction do I see myself going in? And I quickly realized that where I was not where I wanted to be. I wanted to be somewhere else. I wanted to do other things. So I started talking to people and just doing informational interviews. And I started to find a theme. And I realized, oh, I just want to get back into higher education, and I want to work with students. And I figured out from talking to people, they all had the same master's degree behind them. And I thought, that's the right path for me. If I want to be in their position and I want their job, I see a common theme, I'm going to follow that path. And that opened up a lot of doors for me. I saw a lot of new opportunities, started utilizing a lot of those resources. So I did not plan to take a 3-year gap year, but that's just what happened for me. And I learned so much during my time away from taking classes during that gap year, and my experience from my bachelor's really helped me prepare to be a more active student during my master's classes. And it helped me have that background, that experience, that learn a little bit more about who I am, and have some of those answers to questions that I didn't know when I graduated with my bachelor's, but now I have those answers now that I've graduated with my master's. So if I can have the next slide, please. All right, what happens when I graduate and there are fewer desirable job opportunities? So there are still jobs available, but it just might not be that dream job. It might have a different name. It might be called something different. It might be with a different company. But just know that your career path is a journey. You are a UCLA Bruin. You have an entire network of Bruins that are available to help you. You've got current students, you've got alums, and you can definitely rely on that entire network to help you develop who you are and really expand your personal network too. And it's okay to not have an answer immediately. We have a lot of questions right now, and not all of those questions have answers, but just asking those questions and getting your mind thinking about what's going to happen, where you want to go. This is really good practice for yourself, and it's a good way to kind of exercise and stretch those muscles. So it's really good to start asking some of those questions now. And then during either your gap year or during right now, it's definitely time for growth. Your journey is not linear, and this is your journey. So like we started off at the beginning, this is your path. It's going to be different than the person sitting next to you, but it might look exactly the same. But it just depends on what's going to be the best for you and what path you want to go down and where you want to end up in your future. If I can have the next slide, please. So student testimony. So this is, we're referring back to our student here at UCLA. His name is Martin. He has just recently graduated, But when we reached out to him, he gave us a little bit of information about what his experience is like coming through graduation. So I'm going to go ahead and read this to you all. Navigating the job market is scary right now. But what I keep telling myself is this: apply everywhere and eventually someone will give you a chance. That's why I sent over 10 applications to different schools. I interviewed over 12 times in the past month, and every place I applied to is now encountering a hiring freeze. Wild. But just reminding myself that everything will get better and that I have now the experience from my gap years, my degree, and my personality. I'm bound to get hired eventually. Honestly, it was those gap years I took that helped me realize the career I want is what I really want, and that it gave me so much experience now that I use in my interviews today. So this student definitely has a really positive outlook. Yes, it might be frustrating that going on interviews and it's kind of hard to find the information that you want or get the answers that you want, but still moving forward, still asking questions, and a lot of that experience, right, that he referenced earlier from his personality, from taking classes, from taking his gap year. So all of that leads to where he wants to go now. So if I can have the next slide, please. So how can I meet new people? So there's a couple different ways you might be able to do this. And using your online networks is key right now. So since we're all working remotely, or most of us are working remotely, then relying on LinkedIn or UCLA One. So on LinkedIn, you're going to be able to access current students, maybe reach out to students that have, or students or professionals that have job titles that you're interested in or fields that you're also interested in. But you can also access and reach out to alums. UCLA One, once you do graduate from UCLA, you will be able to access UCLA One and then sign up for a mentorship program on there. So you'll be able to connect with some other students. And then other ways to expand your online networks is just going to employer events, professional associations, attending some volunteer organizations, and really expanding your personal network. So there's a lot of opportunities in making sure that you're kind of staying aware of everything that's going on and taking advantage of those situations, being more proactive than reactive, and figuring out what you want to do, who you want to get in contact with, and start asking those questions now. And the next slide, please. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Ricardo to talk about some of our overall considerations.
Perfect. Thank you, Carolyn. Alrighty. So kind of just to wrap up, these are some just overall considerations, some things to think about, right, as you're navigating the next uh, decision in your career development and the next steps that you want to do in your life and whether you should go to graduate or professional school, right? So quickly, some things are, what is your relocation going to look like, right? Are you going to have to relocate to graduate school? And that kind of ties into the fourth point of being in a virtual and remote world, right? As you all are experiencing now, you're all taking your classes remotely or online. So that's something to think about, right? If you are going to be going to graduate school in this upcoming fall semester or are thinking about it, um, or for even maybe even later on, how is that going to look like, right? How are you doing now, taking online or remote classes? I know I've personally spoken to students that some students thrive on that. They enjoy it, they like it, they can do it. Some other students don't. They like to be in person, and it might be even difficult to do remote. So, for example, if you are one of those students um, who has difficulty doing remote or online classes, maybe you want to think about, well, is right now, considering that I have no other choice but to do remote, is this now the good time? Like, is this going to help me while I'm taking graduate classes? And then something else that we don't know, right? Of course, we don't know how long COVID-19 is going to continue, and college campuses are going to be um, shut down for as far as like that you can attend physically, right? We don't know, we don't have that information. So that's also something to think about. In addition to that, also just balancing classes with work, something that we already talked about previously, right? How does it look like now? How are you balancing your classes? And if you are working or doing internships or other experiential opportunities, how does that look? Are you able to manage that? And if you go into graduate school, are any responsibilities going to change? Are you going to have to work more, or can you work less? Or so, going back to everyone's different. Everyone has different factors and things that are affecting or playing a role in their lives, which kind of ties into finances as well, right? Thinking about financing school, if you are thinking about going to graduate school, how are you going to finance that, and also some other personal expenses. So I know for me, for example, I took out additional loans when I went to graduate school. I mean, and that was a decision that I made for myself. I took out additional loans so that I can, support myself while going through school. Because I was working internships, but those were only part time or are only part time. So part of me kind of balancing myself or helping out was to take out additional loans to help. That might work for some folks. It might not work for others. But at least start thinking about how you want to balance all that out. Alrighty, and then before we wrap up, just a last minute reminder to fill out this tiny URL. It should also be in the chat box. So please take a moment to fill it out to get access to the slides. The slides will be sent to you, but we need you to fill all this out so we can have your information ascended to. Perfect. And then that leaves us with Q&A. So we do have about 15 additional minutes. So I do see some Q&A in the box. But yeah, of course, thank you once again, y'all, for joining us today. It was a pleasure. It was a lot of fun. And now we'll open it up.
Perfect. So let's just start going through some of the Q&A questions.